The morning Julian Hartwell's car died in the middle of nowhere, he knew the universe had a twisted sense of humor. His sleek black sedan sputtered to a stop on a street lined with shops that looked like they belonged in a postcard from 30 years ago. No valet parking, no marble facades, just faded awnings and hand-painted signs that probably violated a dozen city codes. Julian stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes meeting cracked pavement, and pulled out his phone. Dead battery. Of course, his driver was 40 minutes. Away, his morning was ruined, and the quarterly meeting with the board would start without him. For a man who controlled every variable in his life with military precision, this chaos felt like a personal insult. The street was nearly empty except for an old woman walking a small dog and a few cars that had seen better decades. Julian spotted a bakery across the street, its window displaying croissants that actually looked handmade. At least he could get coffee while he waited. He crossed the street with sharp strides, already composing the speech he would deliver to his mechanic about reliability and consequences. The bell above the door chimed when he entered, a cheerful sound that immediately annoyed him. The bakery was smaller than his office bathroom, with mismatched tables and chairs that looked collected from yard sales. Flour dust hung in the air, catching the morning sunlight, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around him like an unwanted hug. Behind, the counter stood a woman with flour on her cheek and exhaustion in her eyes. She looked up when he entered, and Julian found himself straightening his tie under her gaze. She was pretty in that real way he had forgotten existed, with brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and hands that moved with practiced efficiency as she boxed pastries. "Good morning," she said, her voice pleasant but guarded. "What can I get you?" "Black coffee." "Large. Quickly, please." Julian's tone was automatic, the voice he used with assistants and subordinates. The woman's smile tightened slightly. "We have medium and small. No large. And the please is appreciated, though the quickly is unnecessary since you're the only customer." Julian blinked. People didn't speak to him like that. People smiled too widely and agreed too quickly and made sure he never had to ask twice for anything. He opened his mouth to respond when a small figure darted out from behind the counter. The girl was maybe 6 years old, with dark curls escaping from 2 pigtails and a smile that showed a missing front tooth. She carried a mug of what looked like hot chocolate, concentrating so hard on not spilling that she didn't see Julian until she collided directly with his legs. The hot chocolate flew upward in an arc that would have been beautiful if it wasn't heading straight for Julian's suit. The liquid hit his jacket and shirt, spreading across the fabric that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The mug clattered to the floor, somehow not breaking, rolling in lazy circles on the worn linoleum. The silence that followed felt heavy. Julian looked down at his ruined suit, at the brown stains spreading across dove-gray wool, and something strange happened. Instead of the explosion of anger he expected, he felt nothing. Just a weird detachment, as if he was watching someone else's morning fall apart. "Sophie!" The woman rushed around the counter, pulling the girl back. Her face had gone pale. "I'm so sorry. She didn't mean to. I'll pay for the cleaning, just please don't—" "Don't what?" Julian heard himself ask. His voice came out softer than intended. The woman stopped, still holding her daughter's shoulders. "Don't be angry. Don't sue us. Don't make this worse than it already is." Julian looked at the girl. She was trying not to cry, her bottom lip trembling, both small fists pressed against her mouth. The sight of her fighting tears did something to his chest, like a muscle he had forgotten existed, suddenly remembering how to work. "Are you hurt?" he asked the girl directly. She shook her head, eyes wide. "Then we're fine." Julian crouched down, ignoring the protest from his knees, and the fact that he was getting closer to the floor his suit had just baptized. "Accidents happen. That's what my mother used to say, though she usually said it when I broke something. Expensive." "Did you break expensive things a lot?" Sophie's voice was small but curious. "More than I should have." Julian admitted. He found himself smiling, which felt strange. His face had forgotten how to arrange itself around genuine amusement. Natalie was staring at him like he had grown a second head. "You're really not angry?" "Oh, I'm definitely annoyed," Julian said, standing up and looking at the disaster that was his suit. "But at my car, not at your daughter. Children move like small tornadoes. Everyone knows that." "Not everyone," Natalie said quietly, and something in her tone made Julian look at her more carefully. She was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between suspicion and surprise. Sophie tugged at his wet sleeve. "I can help clean it. Mama taught me how to get stains out. We get lots of stains here." "I bet you do," Julian said. He noticed the girls' clothes were worn but clean, patched in places with careful stitches. The bakery itself showed the same careful maintenance, everything old but loved, held together with determination and probably not enough money. "Let me make you a fresh coffee," Natalie said. "On the house, and I really will pay for the dry cleaning, if you leave me your information." "Don't worry about it." Julian surprised himself with the words. "But I will take that coffee. Medium. And whatever this one was drinking before she redecorated my suit." "Hot chocolate," Sophie said solemnly, "with extra marshmallows because Mama says Fridays are for treating yourself even when money is tight." "Sophie," Natalie warned, but Julian saw the flush creeping up her neck, pride and embarrassment mixing in her expression. "Hot chocolate sounds perfect," Julian said. "I haven't had hot chocolate since I was probably your age." "That's really sad," Sophie informed him with the brutal honesty of children. "Hot chocolate is important." Julian laughed, and the sound shocked him. When was the last time he had laughed? At something that wasn't calculated or polite? When had genuine amusement felt this foreign in his own chest? Natalie moved behind the counter, preparing drinks with movements that spoke of thousands of repetitions. Julian watched her hands, capable and quick, noticed the small burns on her forearms that came from working with hot ovens. She glanced up and caught him staring, and for a moment their eyes met and held. "I'm Natalie," she said. "Natalie Porter. This is my bakery. Well, for now anyway." "For now?" Julian found himself asking, though he never asked about people's personal situations. "Long story." Natalie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The kind that's better saved for people who aren't strangers in expensive suits." "Even if the expensive suit is currently decorated with hot chocolate?" "Especially then." But her smile warmed slightly. Sophie climbed onto a stool near Julian. "Are you rich? You look rich. Mama says rich people don't usually come to our bakery because we're not fancy." "Sophie," Natalie said again, more firmly, this time. But Julian found himself answering honestly. "Yes, I'm rich. Does that bother you?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "Not if you're nice. Money doesn't make people nice. My teacher says character makes people nice." "Your teacher sounds smart." Julian accepted the coffee Natalie handed him and took a sip. It was good. Really good. Better than the expensive blend. His assistant ordered for his office. "She's okay," Sophie said. "Sometimes she assigns too much homework, though." Julian found himself sitting at one of the mismatched tables, listening to Sophie talk about school while Natalie worked. He should have been making calls, finding another way to get to the office, managing the crisis of his absence. Instead, he sat in a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and watched a little girl draw pictures on paper napkins. Natalie brought him a croissant without being asked. "You looked hungry?" "I am," Julian realized. He had been hungry for years, though not for food. When his driver finally called to say he was outside, Julian stood reluctantly. The bakery had somehow become warm while he sat there, or maybe he had just thawed slightly. He left money on the counter, far too much for coffee and a croissant, and was halfway to the door when Sophie called out, "Will you come back?" Even though Your suit is ruined." Julian turned and looked at the girl, at her mother standing behind the counter with guarded hope in her eyes, at the bakery that felt more real than anything in his carefully constructed life. "Yes," he said, surprising himself again. "I think I will." Outside, his driver held the door of the replacement car, and Julian slid into leather seats that suddenly felt too cold. As they pulled away, he looked back at the bakery, at Natalie, visible through the window, and felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been frozen for too long starting to crack. His phone had charged enough to show 73 messages, 6 missed calls, and a calendar full of obligations. Julian stared at the screen, then looked at the stain on his suit, still damp and obvious. He thought about Sophie's question about whether he would come back, and Natalie's expression that suggested she expected nothing from people like him. For the first time in years, Julian Hartwell wanted to be different than what people expected. Julian told himself he returned to the bakery because the coffee was exceptional. He told his assistant he had discovered a supplier meeting location in that neighborhood. He told his driver to take the route past Porter's bakery every morning, claiming it avoided traffic. The truth was harder to admit. The truth was that every morning at 7:30, he found himself pushing through that cheerful door, hearing that bell chime and feeling something in his chest unclench. The truth was that Sophie's excited wave and Natalie's careful smile had become the best part of his carefully scheduled days. "You're here again," Natalie said on his 5th visit, her tone somewhere between amusement and suspicion. She poured his coffee without asking what he wanted, having memorized his order. "Don't you have important business meetings to attend?" "I do," Julian admitted, accepting the cup. "But I've discovered that starting the day with good coffee improves my decision-making." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Natalie's eyes held a challenge, but also something softer. She had stopped treating him like a stranger who might sue them. Though the wariness never fully left her expression, Sophie appeared. From the kitchen, her hands covered in flour. "Julian, look, Mama is teaching me to make bread. Do you know how to make bread?" "I don't," Julian confessed. The admission felt larger than it should. He ran companies, managed billions, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But he couldn't make bread. "That's sad," Sophie declared, echoing her earlier assessment of his hot chocolate deprivation. "Everyone should know how to make something with their hands. Otherwise, how do you know what things cost?" Julian looked at Natalie, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have been talking about the value of manual labor where she could hear me. "Your mother is right," Julian said to Sophie. "I've forgotten what things cost. The real cost, I mean, not the price tag." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, the wariness softening into something that looked almost like respect. She opened her mouth to respond when the door opened and a man in a suit entered. Not expensive like Julian's suits, but trying hard to appear professional. He carried a briefcase and wore the expression of someone delivering bad news who had practiced looking sympathetic. "Mrs. Porter," the man said, his voice oily with false concern. "I hope this isn't a bad time." Natalie's whole body tensed. "Mr. Richardson, I told you I needed more time to consider." "I understand, but my clients are eager to move forward. The offer is generous, really, considering the property's condition and location." Richardson pulled papers from his briefcase. "Urban Renewal Associates is prepared to offer you 30% above market value. That's substantially more than you'd get anywhere else." Julian felt his coffee turn bitter in his mouth. Urban Renewal Associates. The name triggered recognition, unwelcome and immediate. That was one of his subsidiary companies, the one that specialized in acquiring underperforming properties for redevelopment. He had approved their quarterly acquisition list 3 weeks ago, barely glancing at the addresses. "I don't want to sell," Natalie said, her voice tight. "This bakery has been in my family for 2 generations. My grandmother started it. My mother expanded it. I'm not interested in your offer, no matter how generous you claim it is. Mrs. Porter, please be reasonable. The entire block is being redeveloped. You'll be surrounded by construction for months, possibly years. Your business will suffer regardless. It's better to take the offer now than to lose everything later. Julian watched Natalie's hands grip the counter, her knuckles white. Sophie had gone very quiet, pressing against her mother's side with the instinct of children who sense adult distress. I need time to think, Natalie said finally. At least give me that. 2 weeks, Richardson said, placing the papers on the counter. After that, the offer decreases by 10% monthly. Urban Renewal Associates has other opportunities to pursue. He nodded to Julian as he left, one businessman acknowledging another. The silence after the door closed felt heavy. Sophie looked up at her mother with worried eyes. Mama, what does redevelopment mean? It means change, baby, Natalie said softly. Big changes that we might not be ready for. Julian set his coffee down carefully. His mind was racing, connecting pieces he should have seen earlier. The addresses on that acquisition list, the neighborhood designation, the profit projections that had looked so promising in the boardroom suddenly felt like blood money. How long have they been pressuring you? He asked quietly. Natalie looked at him, and for the first time since they met, he saw the full weight of what she carried. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate determination to hold on to something that meant more than money. 2 months, she said. Ever since Urban Renewal Associates bought the properties on either side of us. They want the whole block for some luxury development. Condos that will cost more than most people make in 5 years. Julian felt sick. He had approved that development, had nodded along when his team presented the projected returns, the market analysis, the demographic studies. He had never once thought about the grandmother who started a bakery, or the single mother trying to preserve her family legacy, or the little girl who made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows on Fridays. There must be options, Julian said, knowing how hollow the words sounded. Options require money or power, Natalie said, her laugh bitter. I have neither. I've talked to lawyers, but fighting corporations like Urban Renewal Associates costs more than I could earn in 10 years. They know that. They count on it. Sophie tugged at Julian's sleeve. Are you sad? You look like you're going to cry, but you're trying not to. Julian knelt down, meeting the girl's concerned eyes. I am sad, Sophie. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions without thinking about all the people those decisions hurt. And sometimes those grown-ups need to be reminded that people matter more than profits. Are you one of those grown-ups? Sophie asked, with devastating directness. Yes, Julian admitted. I think I am. He stood and looked at Natalie. I need to make a call. May I use your kitchen? Natalie studied him for a long moment, then nodded, slowly. Julian stepped into the back, pulling out his phone with hands that shook slightly. He dialed his chief operations officer, a man who had worked with him for 15 years. David, I need the files on the Urban Renewal Associates acquisition project, all of them, including the list of current holdouts. Sir, we're in the middle of quarterly reviews. Can this wait? No, send them now, and cancel the Porter's Bakery acquisition. Pull the offer completely. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, Sir, that's going to create complications. We've invested significant resources in that block. One holdout compromises the entire development plan. Then revise the development plan. Work around the bakery. I don't care what it costs. Mr. Hartwell, with respect, this isn't how we operate. We have shareholders to consider, profit margins to maintain. Sentiment can't dictate business decisions. Julian looked through the kitchen door at Natalie wiping down the counter with fierce concentration, at Sophie drawing pictures with crayons at one of the mismatched tables. Maybe it should. Maybe we've forgotten that businesses operate in communities, not vacuums. Send me the files, David. Consider this a new directive. He hung up before his COO could argue further. When he returned to the main bakery, Natalie was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. What did you do? She asked. Something I should have done weeks ago, Julian said. Ask the right questions. I don't understand. Julian took a breath. I own Urban Renewal Associates. The company trying to buy your bakery is mine. I approved the acquisition list without looking at individual properties. I didn't know about this place, but that's not an excuse. I should have known. I should have cared enough to know. Natalie went very still. Sophie stopped coloring, her crayon frozen mid-stroke. You're the reason we might lose our home, Natalie said slowly. You're the one destroying everything my family built. I was, Julian corrected. Past tense, I just canceled the acquisition. You won't receive any more offers or pressure from my company. Why? The word came out sharp, skeptical. What do you get from this sudden attack of conscience? Nothing, Julian said honestly. Probably lose the confidence of my board and several million in projected returns, but I get to sleep at night, which I haven't been doing well lately. Natalie laughed, but it sounded close to tears. Do you expect me to... Thank you? To be grateful that you've decided to stop destroying my life out of the goodness of your heart? No, Julian said quietly. I expect you to be angry. I expect you to tell me to leave and never come back. I expect Sophie to look at me the way she's looking at me right now, like I'm a stranger she can't trust. Sophie was indeed staring at him, her earlier warmth replaced with confusion and hurt. You were going to make us leave? I didn't know, Julian said, kneeling again so they were eye level. That doesn't make it better, I know, but I'm trying to fix it now. Sometimes people make terrible mistakes, and all they can do is try to make them right. Mama says sorry doesn't count if you keep doing the bad thing, Sophie said. Your mama is right, Julian agreed. So I'm not just saying sorry, I'm changing what I do, how I do business, who I consider when I make decisions. Natalie had tears on her cheeks now, angry tears that she wiped away with rough swipes. You think one gesture fixes everything? You think stopping your company from destroying us makes you a hero? We still have debt, still struggle every month, still face a dozen other ways this bakery could fail. Your guilt doesn't change our reality. I know, Julian said, standing. But maybe I can help with the other things too. Not as charity, as investment. This bakery is good. The food is excellent. You have loyal customers and a location that could work with proper marketing and capital. I don't want your money, Natalie said fiercely. I don't want to owe you anything. Then don't think of it as owing me. Think of it as me paying back what I tried to take. Your family built something real here, something that matters. I want to help preserve that, if you'll let me. Natalie looked at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through anger, suspicion, hope, and fear. Finally, she said, I need time. I need to think without you standing in my bakery looking at me, like I'm some kind of redemption project. That's fair, Julian said. He pulled out his card, setting it on the counter. If you decide you want to talk, call me. If you decide you never want to see me again, that's okay too. Either way, the acquisition is canceled. You have my word. He walked to the door, then paused. Sophie, your mother is right about a lot of things. Sorry doesn't count unless the behavior changes. I'm going to try to change. I hope someday you'll believe that. Outside, the morning had turned gray, clouds rolling in with the promise of rain. Julian sat in his car for a long moment, his driver waiting patiently. Through the bakery window, he could see Natalie holding Sophie, both of them talking in that intense way mothers and daughters do when the world feels uncertain. Julian had spent his entire adult life building an empire on the principle that sentiment was weakness. That successful business required cold calculation and emotional distance. Looking at the bakery, at the family inside fighting to preserve something his company had tried to destroy, he realized how wrong he had been. Some things mattered more than profit margins. Some mistakes required more than money to fix. Some warmth was worth the risk of getting burned. The board meeting 3 days later felt like standing trial. Julian sat at the head of the table in the conference room that overlooked the city, facing 12 men and women whose expressions ranged from confused to openly hostile. The quarterly projections displayed on the screen behind him showed the gap where the Urban Renewal Associates' profits should have been. "Let me understand this correctly," Gerald Hutchins, the senior board member, said slowly. "You canceled a multi-million-dollar development project because of a bakery?" "Because of the people who own that bakery," Julian corrected. "And because I realized our acquisition strategy wasn't considering the human cost of our business decisions." The human cost. Patricia Lim, the CFO, leaned forward with barely controlled frustration. "Julian, we run a corporation, not a charity. Our responsibility is to shareholders, not to preserve every struggling small business in the city." "What if those things aren't mutually exclusive?" Julian asked. "What if we could build developments that incorporate existing businesses instead of destroying them? What if sustainable growth means working with communities instead of bulldozing through them?" "That's idealistic nonsense," Hutchins said bluntly. "Your father built this company on practical decisions, not sentiment. He's probably turning in his grave watching you throw away millions over coffee shop feelings." The words hit harder than they should have. Julian's father had been a brilliant businessman and a terrible parent, someone who measured success in quarterly earnings and considered emotions a liability. For years, Julian had tried to become exactly like him, believing that was what strength looked like. "My father also died alone," Julian said quietly. "Surrounded by money and achievements, but not a single person who loved him. Maybe his way wasn't the only way. Maybe it wasn't even the best way." The silence that followed felt heavy. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice softer. "Julian, we respect you, but this board has a fiduciary duty. If you continue making decisions based on personal feelings rather than financial analysis, we'll have no choice but to call for a vote of confidence." Julian looked at each board member in turn, seeing the doubt and disappointment in their faces. These were people he had worked with for years, people who had trusted his leadership. Now they were questioning everything. "I understand," Julian said, "and I'm prepared to face that vote when it comes. But I'm also prepared to prove that business with conscience isn't just idealistic nonsense. It's the future. Give me 6 months to show you." He left the meeting knowing he had probably just ended his career as he knew it. His phone showed 3 messages from David, his COO, each more urgent than the last. But there was also a message from a number he didn't recognize. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. "This is Natalie Porter. Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop neutral territory, neither his world nor hers. Natalie arrived 10 minutes, late, breathless, and apologetic. "Sophie's school called. She's sick. I need to pick her up soon, but I wanted to see you first." "Is she okay?" Julian felt immediate concern, sharper than he expected. Fever and stomach pain. Probably just a bug, but with kids you never know. Natalie sat down across from him, looking exhausted. "I've been thinking about what you said, about helping the bakery, about changing how you do business." "And?" Julian tried to keep his voice neutral. "I heard something interesting yesterday. My supplier mentioned that several other small businesses in the area received calls from Urban Renewal Associates, canceling their acquisition offers. He said it was unprecedented, that someone high up had ordered a complete strategy revision." Julian said nothing, waiting. "That was you, wasn't it?" Natalie continued. "You didn't just stop the bakery acquisition, you changed the entire project." "The board is considering removing me because of it," Julian admitted. "Apparently conscience is bad for quarterly earnings." Natalie reached across the table, her hand hovering near his, but not quite touching. "Why would you risk that? You barely know me. You don't owe me anything." "I know you well enough," Julian said. "I know you work 16-hour days to keep a Business alive, that means more than money. I know you're raising a remarkable daughter who asks the kind of questions most adults are afraid to consider. I know that meeting you made me realize I've been living half a life, measuring success in all the wrong ways. Julian, Natalie said softly, and the way she spoke his name made his chest ache. Her phone rang, the school calling again. Natalie answered, and Julian watched the color drain from her face. I'll be right there. Tell her I'm coming. What's wrong? Julian was already standing. Sophie collapsed. They're calling an ambulance. Natalie's voice shook. I don't have a car here. I took the bus. I need to get to her. My car, Julian said, already moving. We'll be there in 10 minutes. They made it to the school in 8, Julian's driver running 2 red lights while Julian held Natalie's hand. In the back seat. She was crying silently, all her fierce independence stripped away by maternal fear. Sophie was being loaded into an ambulance when they arrived, her small face pale and frightened. Mama, she called weakly, and Natalie rushed to her side. I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Natalie climbed into the ambulance, and Julian found himself following without asking permission. The paramedics started to protest, but something in Julian's expression stopped him. They rode to the hospital in tense silence, Sophie drifting in and out of consciousness, while Natalie held her hand and whispered reassurances that sounded like prayers. The emergency room was chaos, but Julian made calls that made things happen, faster. A private room, the best pediatric surgeon. Tests that normally took hours completed in minutes. He didn't think about the cost or the favors he was calling in. He thought about Sophie asking him if rich people cried differently, about her saying hot chocolate was important, about her looking at him with disappointment when she learned what his company had tried to do. 6 hours later, the surgeon emerged with good news. Appendicitis, caught just in time. Sophie would recover fully, but another few hours, and it could have been much worse. Natalie collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, all the fear and tension releasing at once. Julian sat beside her, and she turned into his chest without hesitation, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. He held her, his expensive suit collecting her tears, thinking about how none of his success mattered compared to this moment. Thank you, Natalie whispered against his shoulder. For everything. For being here. For making things happen. For caring about us when you had no reason to. I had every reason, Julian said quietly. You and Sophie reminded me what it means to be human. To care about things that matter. To build something real instead of just profitable. Natalie pulled back, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes. I was so angry at you. Part of me still is. But watching you today, seeing how you moved mountains for Sophie without hesitation, I realized something. What? Julian's heart was beating too fast. That people can change. That mistakes don't define us if we're brave enough to do better. That maybe the universe put you in my bakery that day for a reason. I fell in love with you, Julian said, the words coming out raw and honest. Somewhere between the hot chocolate, disaster, and watching you fight to save your family's legacy. I know it's complicated. I know I'm the last person you should trust. But I need you to know that this isn't guilt or charity. It's real. Natalie's eyes filled with fresh tears. I'm terrified. Of trusting you. Of letting Sophie get attached. Of believing this could work when our worlds are so different. Then, be terrified with me, Julian said, because I'm scared too. Scared I'll mess this up. Scared I don't know how to be what you need. But I want to try. I want to learn how to make bread and drink hot chocolate on Fridays and measure success by things that actually matter. Natalie laughed through her tears. That's a terrible business strategy. Maybe, Julian agreed, but it's a great life strategy. She kissed him then, soft and careful, like testing something fragile. Julian kissed her back, thinking about how strange it was that losing everything could feel like gaining the world. 6 months later, Julian stood in the bakery on a Saturday morning. flour on his hands and Sophie instructing him on proper kneading technique. The board had voted to keep him as CEO by a narrow margin, impressed despite themselves by his revised business model that incorporated community investment alongside profit margins. His quarterly earnings were down, but his satisfaction was higher than it had been in years. Natalie emerged from the kitchen, her hair escaping from its bun as always, her smile warm and real. "How's the student doing?" "Terrible," Sophie announced cheerfully. "But he's trying really hard, so that's good." "Trying hard counts," Julian agreed, pulling Natalie close with his flour-covered hands. She laughed and didn't pull away. Outside, the neighborhood was changing, but this time the change included new businesses opening alongside old ones, affordable housing mixed with market-rate developments, and communities strengthened instead of displaced. Julian's company had become something different, something his father wouldn't have recognized, something that measured success in more than dollars. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Julian, when you and Mama get married, can I be in charge of the cake? I'm learning to bake really good cakes." "We're not getting married," Natalie said quickly, but her cheeks flushed pink. "Yet?" Julian added with a smile. "We're not getting married yet." Sophie grinned, showing the gap where her tooth was, growing back. "That's what I thought." Julian looked at the woman he loved and the child who had taught him more than any business school, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the warmth of genuine connection, and thought about how sometimes the best transformations come from the most unexpected collisions. Sometimes you have to lose your way to find your home. Sometimes the heart of ice needs a small bakery and an even smaller girl to teach it how to melt. Sometimes the best happy endings are really just brave new beginnings, filled with flour and hot chocolate and love that wasn't looking for logic. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. The end.